So, hello, good
Hi,
morning and good evening.
good
Want
morning.
to want to give a very warm welcome to our special guest on Talking Back to Suicide, Terry Cheney. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here this morning.
And I want to remind Terry and myself and let Kino know for the first time how the two of us made a connection, right? So this goes back a while ago. I had read your book, right? And you've written several books, which you'll
Right.
with us about, but it might have been in your memoir, Manic. Uh, Possibly there was a chapter, and in that chapter, there was some reference to a smile and what can be contained within a smile.
Yes.
And I ended up sending that chapter to a friend of mine who's a musician. And John Berenzi and I go all the way back to kindergarten, right?
Wow.
And I'm the founder director of the Hold On campaign for suicide prevention. We use the power of art to educate, connect, express, and heal. And John so generously had said that he would like to compose a song and to dedicate it to the Hold On campaign. And he shared with me some ideas that he was having. And the title of his song was Sad Eyes of a Smile. And Terry, I sent him your essay.
That is incredible. Thank you so much,
And then I had reached out to you and told you the story and had shared the song that he had done.
which was
And that,
beautiful, by the way. It's
oh,
just,
thank you. And of course, I'll share that with John. And then that was way before there was a Talking Back to Suicide podcast. And then I reached out to you again, and I'm so grateful for you to be with us.
thank
So I was pulling up from the New York Times, right, some information, and one article that I saw, and this is from January 13th, 2008, quite a while ago,
you. Yeah.
right? And it's under the title in the New York Times of Modern Love, and the title was Take Me as I Am, Whoever I Am. And I thought perhaps as a starting point, you could reference that not only in terms of what that was about, but as an overarching umbrella, perhaps, of your life.
Well, it's funny because I did not choose that title, but I've
Oh,
come to like the New York Times chose it. I've come to like it because I think it does express my journey pretty well. I should just footnote that article became a Modern Love TV series, and Anne Hathaway played me. Um, that was like 10 years later. So that Take Me Where, who, as I am, whoever I am, has sort of followed me for a while.
so in in terms of your mental health experience in your life, right? This goes back to childhood or reflecting back. Maybe you could share a bit about what was going on for you.
Sure. I think that I have always had bipolar disorder because I look back on my childhood and there were periods of extreme depression. Even if you can believe it, at age 7, an attempt at suicide by taking my mother's pills, which I later found out were just diuretics, so didn't really hurt me, but I was very upset over a homework assignment. So my emotions were always quite extreme, even as a child. And I'd have these periods where I couldn't go to school. I'd just be in bed, um, unable to move, unable to do anything. And then that would be followed by these astonishing periods of productivity where I'd go back to school and I'd make up everything that I'd lost, all the homework, do extra credit reports. And strangely enough, I succeeded that way. I was always an A+ student, and the interesting thing to me is that nobody really thought that was strange enough to send me to a doctor. Of course, back then, that just didn't happen that much, but, my A+, I think that's what my parents saw. They saw that I was a cheerleader, I was valedictorian, I was, you know, in with the popular crowd, and somehow that's what they focused on, the teachers and my parents. They didn't think that they called those periods where I was not functioning my spells.
Mm.
I would just Terry's having one of her spells, was the assumption. So, yes, I
Well,
think it went all the way back.
going back to when you were 7 years old, um, could you say more about that? What kind of a homework assignment was it?
Well, I don't remember exactly what subject it was in, but I had to have a certain kind of paper to do it on, and it had been given out at school, certain kind of drawing paper or lined paper. I don't know, but I didn't have the right kind of paper, so I couldn't do the assignment. And I sent my father off scurrying to the stationery stores, and he couldn't find the right paper, and I just knew that I wouldn't get an A, and it devastated me. I was just so upset by not being able to achieve, um, that I went into one of my depressions, and from there, when you're in depression, life becomes unbearable sometimes, and I thought it would be better just not to be around than to have to deal with the consequences of not having the right paper, if you can believe it.
And did you search for your mom's pills, or were the pills out?
No, I knew she took, pills. She was a registered nurse, and her legs would swell, and I knew she had these pills for it, and I just thought they were in the medicine cabinet, and I thought, all pills are verboten, right? I knew I wasn't supposed to go in the medicine cabinet, so they were accessible to me, but I didn't know what they did. I thought just pills, that must be deadly somehow.
How did your parents realize what you did?
They didn't, because I ended up going to sleep and just peeing a lot because of the diuretic. But they knew I was extraordinarily upset, but they didn't, find out about the actual attempt. I don't recall what happened when my mother must have noticed her pills were gone, but I don't think she connected it with me.
Did you ever tell them?
Oh, no. No, no. No, my parents were not very supportive of my mental health crises. I mean, they were supportive in other ways, but I think it was always assumed that I was trying to get attention. This is much more so my mother than my father. Uh, it was always frowned on when I would be depressed. So I would just go further into hiding and secrets. Secrets became my language.
What do you mean by secrets?
I wouldn't tell them how depressed I was, how desperate I was. I wouldn't communicate my feelings to them. It just I knew that my mother would be angry with me somehow because, as I said, she was a registered nurse. She didn't like it when the kids got sick, because then she'd say, I work all day with sick people. Now I have to come home to more sickness. So my brother and I tried not to upset her. She was later diagnosed with schizophrenia. So it makes sense looking back that there was abnormality going on, with her.
I'm just thinking how we need to feel safe to be able to share the truth.
I felt very safe with my father, but was so thrilled by my overachieving that I didn't want to burst that bubble. He was my biggest champion all through his life, and I just thought that that's why I got love, was because I could, achieve all these things, and if I didn't, then he wouldn't love me anymore, or he would leave. It was really a terrifying thing to have to achieve, or else.
When you say or else, was it lack of love? Like, I don't love you?
I
If,
think
if
it would
you
mostly
don't,
be he would leave, and I was terrified of being left alone with my mother because we didn't have a terrific relationship, and she frightened me sometimes. She herself attempted suicide once. I think it was a very, uh, mild, if you can ever call a suicide attempt mild, but it was, just taking some pills and then throwing up, but I do remember that. So you just wouldn't want to upset my mother much.
were there any friends that you were able to confide in?
Not about the depression. No, no. I really thought I called it my black beast. I write about it in my second book, The Dark Side of Innocence, Growing Up Bipolar. The black beast was my secret and my shadow. And I really didn't want anyone else to know about it or see it. And that continued, unfortunately, throughout my life until I wrote my first book, Manic. I hid out from pretty much everyone I worked with or my friends, my coworkers. Nobody really knew except my doctors what was going on with me.
So hiding when it was happening?
I would always hide, yes. I'd come up with excuses about being sick, being physically sick. Actually, it was helpful that my mother was an RN because we had medical books around the house, and I would read those and come up with these symptoms of being, having all different I can't remember what illnesses I came up with, but I always had a good symptom available.
With those symptoms, did your mom or
Yes.
dad ever take you to the pediatrician? You know, Terry's saying she feels this, please examine her. Is there a problem of some kind?
We didn't go to the doctor much. I had enough other things that were, let's say, real, like really severe asthma and, uh, I was at the doctor enough that I don't think they were eager to take me more. But no, that for some, that's interesting that you bring that up because looking back, I think it's odd that a child would claim to have hypothyroidism or, something that sophisticated. My thyroid isn't working today. That's pretty weird.
Yes.
But I
And
think that they also probably thought I just wanted to stay out of school and was making things up. That's what I really think happened.
was there ever a time in, let's say, your creative writing class in high school that you started to express some of what was going on with you, but disguised in terms of the writing?
No, never. I did join a writing group much, much later, uh, where but even there, I didn't write about being bipolar or being depressed. I I was a lawyer at the time, and I wrote a lot about the stresses of being a lawyer, but I just didn't feel safe. I didn't feel it was something I could disclose without being isolated or, somehow punished. I always felt like I would be punished for being depressed.
At what point did you understand that there was a illness happening to you?
I think it took until I went into therapy when I was about 27 years old. I finally went into therapy. I had a wonderful therapist named Rita, and Rita diagnosed me first with dysthymia, which is a very mild depression. And then as I felt safer with her and began to divulge more about myself, she realized it was major depression. Um, the bipolar diagnosis didn't come until later, which is very, very common. It takes most people 10 years to get a correct diagnosis.
Let's go back to there you are, 7 years old. What is that, about second grade, perhaps, around there? Yeah. So what started happening as you progressed through elementary school and then through high school in terms of those mood swings?
It would be the same pattern. My depression, fortunately or unfortunately, I'm a rapid cycler. That's when you go in and out of moods rather quickly. So my pattern would be, I mean, I certainly had longer periods of depression back then, but it pretty much was an established mood cycling. So I could anticipate that I was going to be able to make up lost work and achieve again. So I didn't really panic about my outside responsibilities because I knew I could always come back.
Did the symptoms change at all when you started menstruating?
Uh, that's a very good question that no one has ever asked me before. Thank you. Yes, I had bad PMS, very bad, and irregular periods all my life. So uh, it, I never really. I tried to keep track of my period, but it was very difficult because I knew I would get depressed the week before. Um, and I just felt that there was almost sometimes a bit of gratitude in knowing that, okay, this is depression related to my period, as opposed to these horrible periods of depression that would come without any warning or without any reason that I could figure out. Those are the ones that scare me the most.
What kinds of thoughts were you having in your head during those
What kind of thoughts was I
episodes?
having?
Meaning, any thoughts like I'm worthless or I'm guilty, I'm bad, I'm being punished, or I don't understand why this is happening to me, or just wondering what was happening in your mind when you were feeling
Well,
depressed.
I went to Catholic school when I was a child, so the probably the most prominent thought was I've sinned somehow. I'm a sinner. I've done something. God is mad at me. Uh, I'm being punished was a very prominent theme when I was a child. I'm being punished somehow. Um, that's lessened over the years, but as a child, it definitely was what I thought.
And did you continue at times to have suicidal thoughts?
I've always had suicidal thoughts, yes. I've always thought of suicide as my ultimate rescue medicine, which is very, very much depression talking. If it gets worse, I can always kill myself was sort of a common refrain. Of course, I didn't tell anyone that. I didn't even tell my therapist that until much later in therapy.
That back.
I'm sorry, why did I hold that back?
Yeah, from your therapist.
Well, actually, for a very good reason, because I was afraid that she wouldn't treat me anymore. And later on in my life, that actually happened. I had a wonderful psychopharmacologist, a doctor who administers the psychiatric drugs. And I was intensely suicidal after my father's death and attempted several times. And he just said he couldn't treat me anymore because I'd broken our contract that I wouldn't try to kill myself. So yeah, that it actually came to pass. So I think that instinct was not altogether incorrect.
So sorry that that happened. Yeah, right.
I know.
There,
I don't blame him for it because he was in Santa Fe and I was in Los Angeles, and he did most of the treatment by phone. So I think he probably was right that I needed to be seen by someone more local.
somebody closer. I'm thinking, and this may not have applied to what you just talked about, but there used to be the idea of having a safety contract, right? And that you'd say to your patient or client, and as you know, I'm a retired child psychiatrist, but it would be that you agree not to hurt yourself, kill yourself, right? And
Yeah.
and now, as if that was binding or meaningful or productive.
Yeah.
And now it's sort of obviously known that that's not valid or appropriate at all, and can have, very negative consequences, because why should I tell you what's really happening to me?
It's
Right?
what we call in the law a chilling effect. Yes, it had a chilling effect. It really did diminish my feeling that I could be completely open with my therapist. Yes.
Let
And I had
alone,
that contract on a number of occasions. So yeah, yeah.
I'm thinking, let alone without even, quote, having that, quote, contract, a person can be fearful of sharing what's happening, right?
Of
What will that therapist or doctor think of me? Are they going to hospitalize me, when I don't need to be hospitalized, right? That it's not at the level of involuntary. I had an experience of a young adult patient of mine whom I'd been treating for a number of years. And I had always been very open about wanting to know, the truth of how somebody is doing. And not at all some sort of a contract that you can't be thinking of hurting yourself. And one day, Terry, she shared with me that several years before, while she was my patient, that she had nearly tried to hang herself.
Oh, wow.
And on this day, she ended up telling me that that had happened. And as I explained, she had been my patient.
Wow.
And I thanked her for telling me now, but I also asked her what had held her back from telling me back then. And I even, based on the timing of what she was explaining to me, I went over with her the progress note of what was happening back then.
Oh,
And so I asked, what was it? And she said these words that really had a profound effect on me. She said, quote, "I thought you'd take it seriously."
wow. Not sure what that means. I thought you
Yes. Yeah.
serious.
Yeah, yeah, and an outgrowth of that, her saying that to me, and then we continued in treatment together. Was I like to write just to get my thoughts and feelings out on paper, and I was so struck by what she had said, because it's not only what somebody is telling you, it's what they're not telling you
Right.
in terms of being with them as a mental health care provider. So here was an example of what I don't know, right? Uh, and I wrote an essay called "If My Words Could Make a Difference." And I wrote it to her thinking of her. However, but I wasn't thinking I'm writing this for her, but she was the reason why I was writing it. And it starts off, if I were having a heart attack, would I call myself crazy or would I call 911? Right.
Wow.
And then it goes on into the silence, shame, and stigma. Thinking, there's one line like, why do we think our brain is not part of our body? Right. And talking about you can have a heart attack, you can have a brain attack, a cut
Right.
myself attack, I want to kill myself attack, etc. And then at the 988 or 1-800 number back then, statistics around suicide, and it ended up with the line, now that you know the truth and that help is available, don't become a statistic, that your brain and your heart wants you to help yourself. And I ended up sharing the essay with my patient, telling her that she had inspired it. And then I shared it with two of my high school patients. And one of my patients told me she shared it with two of her teachers. And one of those teachers shared it, according to my patient, with every student in every one of their classes.
Oh, how lovely.
And then I found out that the Oregon Council of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry had a grant for collaboration on youth mental health. And I approached ASHA International, which was a nonprofit related to sharing your story, your mental health story. Asha is a Sanskrit word that means healing. They're a nonprofit. I was working for an agency that was not a nonprofit. I approached them. I was a board member and a storyteller with them. We received the grant. And then many years later, now it's 5 years later, there was COVID in between and things weren't happening with the project. But it had to do with young person. If you knew somebody was listening to you and would act on what you said, what are your suggestions on improving youth mental health? And now it's become through the Hold On campaign, because in October 2024, ASHA closed after many years of service, but the Hold On campaign came into existence in 2023, and it was a nonprofit. So fiscally sponsored, so we could roll over the money. And then I approached the Oregon Council to use the funding to make it into a contest. So now it's the Create Resilience Youth Art Contest for suicide prevention.
Oh,
and that all was related to my patient sharing her fear of speaking about what was really happening with her. And also her courage of knowing that she ended up sharing.
Yeah. Does she know what happened?
Yes, she does. Yes, she does.
She must feel so gratified. Wow. That's a great story.
Segueing back to you, Terry, were there ever psychotic experiences that you had with the bipolar disorder?
I never have been psychotic, thank goodness. I have friends who are schizophrenic, and I'm familiar with their stories of psychosis, and it just sounds so terrifying. I'm very grateful I haven't been that far on the spectrum.
And with the manic symptoms, did you have a combination of hypomania as well as mania? And did especially the mania ever get you into, I'll put this in quotation marks, trouble?
I would take it out of quotation marks because, oh my God, yes. Yeah, I would have hypomania first. Hypomania being that, for me, it was a lovely period of euphoria and great productivity. I seemed to be extremely charismatic during those periods, and I just was at the top of my game. And unfortunately, the hypomania would usually cycle into mania, and my judgment would go out the window. Um, I, at one point, I took a trip up north to the Post Ranch Inn in Big Sur, which is a very, very exclusive resort. And I spent literally all my money. I mean, when I say literally, I had just enough to come back down to Los Angeles, but I stayed there until I was broke. I had a fantastic time. I'm not going to say I didn't, but things like that, when you have to live with the consequences, are just so traumatic. So even though people think of mania as this great high time, you're flying high, it always got me into trouble. I had a lot of difficulty with hypersexuality, where I would just be reckless with men, and meet strangers, take them home, that kind of thing, which I would never do in my right mind. So I had pretty much all the classic panic troublemaking symptoms. Yeah.
And what would happen to your ability to have insight into your behavior?
Interesting question. When I was hypomanic, I had insight. At a certain level of mania, after years had gone by and I recognized the symptoms, I could say, okay, I'm getting manic. So I actually wrote something called a manic cheat sheet that I write about in my third book, Modern Madness. I would carry it around, and it just told me all the things that I shouldn't do. So I had insight to a certain level, but when I became really floridly manic, if people would tell me I was talking too fast, or they couldn't understand me, or if they questioned my behavior, I just got kind of belligerent and didn't think they knew what they were talking about, and they were just moving too slowly, would be my answer. So insight left, as well as judgment.
Did having the bipolar disorder affect, let's say, your ability to function in college?
My depressions became much worse. I went to Vassar College, which was a beautiful, beautiful campus and a lovely college. I adored it, but my depressions were much more severe, even because I was away from home and from my father, who was such a source of support and love. I graduated cum laude, with highest honors. So it was the same pattern as I had shown in high school, but I did become more reclusive. I had made a decision. I'd been very socially active in high school on all these clubs, and I just belonged to everything. And I had made a decision that it was too stressful, and I didn't want to do that in college. I just really wanted to focus on learning and studying. It's one of my biggest regrets in life that my bipolar disorder really forced me into my room in a way, and I locked the door, because there were just fantastic people to know at Vassar, and I missed out on that. So that's very sad.
How did you make the decision to go into law?
Very reluctantly. I always wanted to write. I was a writer since I could first hold a pen, and my father was very, very supportive of that as well. And I wrote poetry. That was my thing. And in college, in fact, I had a creative thesis in poetry, so that was great. I just got to write poems all year long. But I just felt that I wasn't brave enough, I think, to be a writer at 21 when I graduated from Vassar. I really didn't have a life yet. I didn't think I had enough to write about. And my father had always wanted me to be a lawyer, so I did. And boy, if I thought I was depressed in college, when I went to law school from day one, I knew it was the hugest mistake. And I actually took a semester off, which was a sort of a break in my pattern of achievement. It was a very severe break for me because I couldn't function. I was so depressed and started to really abuse cocaine and drink, and it was a very difficult period. So I went back after that semester off, but I did not take to law school. I went to UCLA, which is a great law school, um, but it was difficult.
At what point did you start to be prescribed medications? And what was your medication journey? And how did you even feel about the idea of being on medicine?
I've never been reluctant to take medication. Um, when I was a little girl, as I mentioned, I had very bad asthma, and there was a drug called Quadrenol that I could take, and it would get rid of the asthma, and it would also make me pretty high. So I associated drugs in my mind with that wonderful feeling and also the relief, of being able to breathe again. Um, I started taking antidepressants probably around when I first went to therapy. My therapist referred me to a psychopharmacologist a few years ago. Fortunately, nobody really thought I was bipolar. It was just major depression was the diagnosis, so I was just on antidepressants.
Uh, Sometimes, for, as you know, a person who has a bipolar disorder, if they're prescribed an antidepressant, unknowingly, in the sense that it hasn't yet been revealed that there's a bipolar disorder, the antidepressant could trigger some of the hypomania or mania. Did that start to happen to you?
It definitely happened with me. I went through a period that I call my Prozac years of sustained hypomania for about, I think it was 2 to 3 years, um, where I was just hypomanic on the edge of manic, and that's when I became, uh, pretty successful as a lawyer. I was representing Michael Jackson and the major motion picture studios, Quincy Jones, people like that. I was an entertainment litigator, and it was a terrific period. But when the Prozac stopped working, we tried, upping the dose. We tried everything. We tried other antidepressants. Nothing worked. Nothing worked. And I mean, it got to a point where we even were trying experimental drugs from Switzerland because just nothing would work. And that was an incredibly hard time because I was going through all the side effects. I've always been very medication compliant. And when nothing relieves your depression, but all you have are side effects, it just feels so unfair and so cruel.
At what point were you on a mood stabilizer?
Well, what happened was, as I said, my depression was so severe that I had electroshock therapy at uh, which I had 12 sessions of it, and around session 8, um, it catapulted me into the most manic episode I've ever had. That's when I went and spent all my money. Um, that's not completely uncommon. And when I finally came back down to Los Angeles, my doctors realized, okay, well, there's something going on here besides just major depression. And they changed my diagnosis to
So
bipolar.
up until that point, the thought was that this was a unipolar depression. Wow.
And I was on every possible drug for unipolar depression, even MAO inhibitors, which is sort of the last resort. The ECT, as we call electroshock therapy, helped the depression somewhat, but the manic episodes became more frequent.
During the ECT treatment, were you an outpatient or an inpatient? And I'm thinking back, I was trained for my internship and residencies. I first did pediatrics and was certified as a pediatrician. Then I turned right around and did psychiatry. All that was at NYU Bellevue. And,
Wow.
and I will never forget the patient who was, maybe she was in her 60s. She was a pediatrician herself, and she had a severe depression. She was being treated with ECT. She was an inpatient. So that's why I'm asking. I know it could be done outpatient or inpatient as well. What was it like for you?
It was outpatient. It lasted, I think, over a period of 3 months. So we would do one session a week, I think was how it worked. And my mother had to come drive me around. I couldn't drive at the time. And she had to look after me, which I'm really grateful for. But the problem that occurred was that I lost my memory pretty completely. And a lot of it has come back. But there are whole periods of my life that just are sort of fuzzy or I don't remember them at all. So that was very difficult, very deleterious.
And I want to add in that every person is unique in terms of their response to treatment. And there are certainly individuals who have benefited from ECT. However, you need to talk this over with your own physician and the pros and the cons, et cetera. I had witnessed, this goes back decades ago, but at NYU Bellevue, people that did respond to ECT.
And I did respond. Let me be clear. The depression did lift to a pretty good degree. And I used to facilitate a peer support group at UCLA's Neuropsychiatric Institute. I've seen a lot of people go through ECT and have a terrific result. And now the procedure is somewhat different than when I did it in 1994. So the memory loss is not so severe. It's something of a different animal now. So I would never tell someone don't get ECT. I just would tell them to, be aware of possible memory loss, but not anything like I experienced.
I have or had an uncle, my Uncle Freddie, who, looking back on it, I think that he had bipolar disorder and had also become psychotic. And he was hospitalized at NYU Bellevue. In his adulthood, he was a lawyer, had ECT treatment. And the story that my father would tell me was that my uncle had lost his memory related to lawyering, especially, and had to reteach himself the skills that he had lost. And apparently he was able to do that.
Well, I forgot the most basic things, like what a fork was for. I remember staring at a fork and just, what is that thing? I mean, really, really bizarre things like that.
So you had said earlier that it was after the ECT triggered, severe mania with extreme consequences, not your fault, related to the mania and impulsivity and spending, right? It was at that point that it was identified like, yes, this is not major depression. This is bipolar disorder, bipolar 1 disorder.
Right.
And then you were on a mood stabilizer like lithium or Lamictal or.
I've been on every mood stabilizer, obviously lithium, which turned out to be a pretty good drug for me. I think it's the gold standard personally for bipolar treatment. Um, but what happened was the once I was diagnosed as bipolar in 1994, um, my father became ill shortly afterwards with lung cancer, and I had to take care of him. And when he died in 1997, um, I became just acutely suicidal and attempted on, as I said before, on a number of occasions. I don't know why I lived. I don't know why I lived. They were so serious. I mean, I had saved up pills from years of experimentation. So there's no reason other than, well, I have my own theories about why I lived, but um, I don't think there was a pill that could have saved me at that time. I was so distraught after he died. And again, I began really heavy substance use. And that, of course, with bipolar disorder is just verboten. I mean, it just messes up the chemicals in your brain so badly. Um, so that, unfortunately, being diagnosed as bipolar wasn't like a magic turning point in my life.
What eventually helped you in terms of grieving in the mourning, loss of your beloved father? What helped you pull through?
I think ultimately I was hospitalized for severe depression in 1999. And I also got in trouble again, this time big time trouble, because I was drinking and driving. And this is very hard to talk about, but I got 3 DUIs right in a row. Bam, bam, bam. And I hit my personal bottom and was hospitalized and wasn't able to drive. You know, my license was taken away. It was the worst time of my life, but I was at UCLA's Neuropsychiatric Institute for about 3 years outpatient, which is extraordinary. And I began to write again. I began to write my story. I researched bipolar disorder so much, and I thought I wanted to write about famous people with bipolar disorder to let other people know there are celebrities who have this. And then I realized what I really wanted to do was write my own story because that's all I really knew. So I began to write, and I think that was what saved me because ultimately, 7 years later, I emerged with a book, Manic, my first book, and that was the big turnaround in my life.
What was the response to your family, maybe especially your mother, about your
About writing,
writing? Yeah, about writing your book or telling your story.
um, well, my father was gone by then, unfortunately, because he would have just loved what happened to my life.
Mhm.
My mother we didn't talk about it very much. Um, she doesn't show up in Manic really, so she was okay with it. But when I wrote about her a little bit in my second book, she was not happy about that, even though I wrote very glowingly about her, but she did not like being written about. Um, I think it's hard to tell because the book was so successful and so many good things happened as a result of it that I really didn't suffer the consequences that I was afraid of about coming out of the closet.
What consequences were you afraid of?
I was so scared, Diana. I thought that the night before Manic came out, I almost wanted to call my editor and say, we this was a big mistake. I can't do this. I was I was very embarrassed that my former coworkers would read about me now and know that, this was what had been going on with me. I thought I'd be ostracized by my friends, but at the same time, I knew it was necessary. It's the reason I think I survived suicide so many times, was that I needed to be a witness to the pain that I knew so many other people were going through, and that that feeling of purpose and meaning in my life really overcame the fear of disclosure.
Yeah, you were like the phoenix.
Yes, I was a phoenix.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yep. Just the other day, I was looking up, and I live in Oregon. I was looking up most recent statistics for suicide in Oregon. And in, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention lists different states, across the US, with data from the CDC. So they had published, I'm trying to think what year this is, data from 2021, which publication was a couple of years later, you know? And we were listed as 10th leading cause of death in Oregon was suicide.
Wow.
As of 2023 data, which was just published January 2025, so this is the most recent data,
Mhm.
it's now the number 8
Oh,
leading cause of death.
wow. That's terrifying.
It's in Oregon, and this I think is true in the US, it's the second leading cause of death for young people, right?
It is.
Starting, it could even be below teenage years, but upwards into the 30s. What do you think are reasons why suicide is still happening, frequently happening, and at least in the case of my state, is happening even more recently than it had been?
Um, I think although the stigma is better about depression and bipolar disorder, I think it's the secrecy of it, really becomes a suicide predictor. I think if we talk, and for me, this is just based on my own experience. If I was talking about being suicidal, that pretty much meant I wasn't actively intending to do it. It's when I got quiet that it really became a threat. Um, I think there's also, in addition to social stigma, there's also self stigma, and I certainly have gone through that, of feeling, the things the things you tell yourself in the middle of the night. That's what you need to be afraid of, and it's when you can open up and express those thoughts that their power really is dissipated. Um, but unfortunately, although young people are talking about it more and more, I think there's still a lot of secrecy.
Just the other day, I was at an event, like a park celebration,
Mhm.
and I was invited to participate. And I had my Hold On, campaign display table, and a gentleman came up. I think he probably was maybe 65 or so, a very burly looking guy, and he was telling me he knew quite a number of people who had died by suicide,
Mm.
but he was, speaking to me just very authentically. And he said to me, everybody gets depressed, right? Everyone gets depressed. And basically was saying those people that killed themselves, that they were selfish. And why would they do something like that? I'm using his voice, like, I was depressed. I got out of it. I didn't kill myself. So why did that person kill themselves?
Oh,
Mentioned a friend of his who had been in a relationship, and the relationship fell apart, and he ended up killing himself, allegedly due to this relationship breakup. Of course, there's, in a sense, deeper reasons than that would go along with it. But could you speak to that, the idea that perhaps many people can have about depression with a little d, and life's ups and downs, and feeling sad, and having a clinical depression or a bipolar disorder?
yeah, I certainly have been accused of being selfish when I tried to kill myself. And it's shocking every time that happens, that there's that level of misunderstanding. Um, it's a physical disease. Depression is major depression. Beyond, it's so far beyond sadness. I don't think the two can even be compared. When I'm depressed, I'm unable to move physically, so there's something going on physically. It is definitely in my body,
So
and
you're talking about, I can't get out of bed, I
I
can't brush my hair,
can't,
shower,
I can't.
even eat. Yeah.
If Let's say I have a pen sitting right here on my desk. Let's say I wanted to pick up that pen. Um, I couldn't even. I'm sorry, my phone is going off. Just a second. I couldn't even reach out and pick up that pen because it would just be too onerous, too much of an effort to do that. The interesting thing that people don't understand is that I think when you need to be worried is when people come out of the really deep depression and start to feel better, because suicide takes a certain amount of effort. And when I'm really deeply in depression, like I said, I can't move, I can't plan, I can't, take the act that's necessary, take the action that's necessary. But when you do start to feel better, you have that ability to focus and to plan, and that's dangerous, and people need to watch for that. There's something called a mixed state in bipolar disorder, where you have depression and mania mixed together. That is when the most suicides occur, and I've dealt with that a lot, and it's probably, I would say, the biggest predictor of suicide.
Karen, I want to share with you, and I may have shared this with you on emails that we had exchanged, but I have bipolar 2 disorder, not not having the mania,
Yes.
but I can remember, and still have at times these experiences when I'm feeling hypomanic, that it's like a wonderful feeling.
Yes.
And I describe it as, it's sort of figuratively and literally, I feel that I am champagne. I am champagne, and I am effervescent and bubbling up, right? And yet the experience is of concern if it's going to get more extreme than that. I'll give an example that's nowhere as extreme as what you've experienced, but a change in one's thinking, and you look back with embarrassment or shame, like, how could I have been thinking or doing what I was doing? I had an experience. I like to write, and I had written a book called Bird That Wants to Fly, about a traumatized bird that, through terrible life experiences, bad weather, children with rocks, men with shotguns, birds crashing into each other, has decided to walk through life, not fly. and it meets a magical horse who encourages it to spread its wings. And it was illustrated. And amazingly, this became an opera as well, which is a story into itself. But I can remember with this self-published illustrated book that I was thinking every returning serviceman in the military should get this book, because this is such an inspiring book, right? And I should go somewhere and be handing out the book to people in the military. Right? And I look back,
idea, sure.
right? And I look back and I think, oh my God, right? Yes, it's a lovely book, but the grandiosity and almost delusional attributes that I was putting into this little book, right? And then when not in that state of mind, one is able to say, "Oh my goodness, what was that about?" Right? Yeah. Or feeling so much like talking that, almost putting my hand in front of my mouth to make sure that I'm not saying anything.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. See, I never really understood with bipolar 2, which has, as you just said, hypomania, not classic extreme mania.
Not even the duration of the mania, because it's got.
I never quite understood why that would be so troubling to have hypomania, but a friend of mine who wrote a wonderful book called Brainstorm about bipolar 2, Sarah Schley, she wrote about how it really disrupts your life because you then plunge into depression usually afterwards, right? And just the cycling of it is very difficult to live with. But I never quite understood. Sorry, all the phones are going off. I thought I had turned everything off. But I think we're going to have to suffer through a telephone for a moment.
Okay.
I can't.
That's okay.
How to turn it off. It's unplugged and it's ringing. What does that mean?
I don't know. Scary.
I don't know.
I'm going to ask Kino to join in. I know you've been listening hard, Kino.
Yeah, it's crazy how fast time can fly, eh? We're already at an hour. But it's been a great conversation. And Terry, thank you so much for being so open about your life. I know it's not easy for a lot of people out there, but it's appreciated. We love it when guests come on and they're just so open about every component about their journey. I've got 3 points. When you were talking about going to Catholic school, and why I'm bringing this up is because this is the second week in a row where we can touch on religious or spiritual abuse, but more religious abuse, because going through what you went through, the thoughts, the feelings, you get judged a lot, from religion, especially in the Catholic faith. And I'm Catholic myself, and I question the faith like a lot. I've become more spiritual instead of just following doctrine. So I may be feeling something or I do something, and then I'm judged by my parents, I'm judged by my family, I'm judged by the priest, I'm judged by the church, because doctrine is saying it's wrong to feel that way, or your faith is not strong enough. So there's not really a question behind what I'm saying, but for listeners out there, they just block all their judgment out. And for the religious people out there, instead of just following doctrine, actually understand what the person is trying to say or what the person is feeling. Would you agree with us educating, the churches and religious people to behave in that manner?
Well, I think that is a sad side effect of an otherwise beautiful religion. I think spirituality is much more important to me than religion, but that sense of judgment definitely was part of my childhood. So I do understand what you're talking about. Um, I had a very good experience in Catholic school. The nuns were very kind to me, but I've certainly heard horror stories about religious, fanaticism, and that can be really, it can destroy your life and your sense of self. So I do understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, like I don't want to go to a priest, and this is a true story once again on the show, and say, look, I'm feeling depressed and I'm sad. And all he is telling me is go pray,
Right,
right?
right,
Come on. You know, that I'm not saying there's no power in prayer, that's a spell itself. And yes, I'm going to get that guidance from God and from the universe and from the higher powers. But for a religious figure to say, just go pray, for me, I feel, it's not good enough. You're not understanding what I'm telling you. You
right,
know,
right.
so
It's
many
like,
people do that and they don't get past their depression.
hmm it's like a dismissal of your feelings. Yeah, I can understand that.
You rather tell me, be honest with me and say, Kino, I don't understand what you're telling me, go see a psychiatrist. Then I'll be like, thank you for being honest. You rather tell me that. So, today's show was just another example of religious abuse, out there. Um, while you were talking, 7 years old, okay, 7 years old, and you're having those sort of feelings, you can't really make sense of it. I mean, even if you 57 years old today and you're going through depression, it's still hard to make sense of what I'm feeling. And even in 2025, I still feel there's still a lot of 7-year-olds who are going through depression and they can't make sense of it. From what I've gathered throughout this conversation, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there was a lot of expectations in your life, expectations to even go to law school. And even now, I mean, I can even use my own life as an example. I still, even though my parents respect the decisions I made for my life to do what I want to do instead of having some boring corporate job or becoming a doctor or whatever, they would have probably thought I would have become, a doctor or a lawyer. That would have been their expectation for me. But I never go down that path. My brother did, my sister did, but I chose not to. I had a different calling. So, I mean, there's still expectation that we live with, even though I'm still doing the stuff that I love to do in my life, my mother still has, certain expectations. And why do I mean, not why, but we still get so disheartened when our parents are not happy with something that we've done because it's not according to their expectations. So let's focus on the solutions on how do we resolve it. Like, what advice would you give to both children and parents when it comes to expectations? Like, where can parents just tone down a bit when it comes to that and actually pay attention to what the children are actually saying?
Wouldn't that be wonderful? I wish that had happened in my case. I think the expectations of my parents became internalized and became my expectations of myself. And that certainly, when I didn't live up to my own expectations, that would be a surefire predictor of depression and suicidality. So I think expecting just leads to disappointment. It would be so much better, as you say, if parents could simply see who their children are and let them develop their own expectations of themselves, rather than forcing expectations upon them.
Yeah. I think it was Buddha who said something similar as well. Don't have any expectations, and that's how you will actually find happiness in life. Have
Oh,
no expectations at all. Yeah.
Wow.
which actually was quite well said. Yeah, because I mean, it's still out there, people, teenagers are getting so depressed because their parents expect them to do ABC with their life, not knowing that down the line they are going to be so unhappy. Let's look at marriage as well as an example. How we, or not we, but parents push their children to like get married in their early 20s, and all it leads to is an unhappy marriage and divorce. You know, it's a simple example, but I just see it happening out there, and you're depressed. You're depressed in your own marriage, and it's not how it's supposed to be, right? You're
Right.
supposed to be happy in your marriage. So this, I don't know, it's a simple example I'm using, but it's still out there. Just expectations. I feel like parents need to stop giving their children expectations. It's going to lead to less depression and anxiety. And whatever they feel like they want to do with their life, we should just give them that opportunity to do so. And if they make a mistake, it's their mistake to make. And hopefully they learn from it. And that's what we should hope for. Let's be like a pillar of support and guide them. I want to be able to go to my mother or my father and say, look, this is what I want to do with my life. I'm uncertain about it, but please, can you guide me? And I want my parents to say, yes, no problem. Let's look. What's the options?
That would
I feel
so
like as a kid, I would be so much more happier.
yes, I
That was
agree.
the
I
case.
totally agree.
There's an expression, I wish I could remember who said this, but the quote is the unlived life of the parent,
Oh, wow.
right? And the
Yeah,
impact
yeah.
of the unlived life of the parent on their children. So I would encourage too those adults, who are also parents to self-reflect in a compassionate way on their own lives and see what they can do to become more authentic in themselves. And that will bring them greater happiness and will also, I think, alleviate the stress on the child. Sometimes the parent is wanting the child to achieve the life they wish they could have led.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm living proof of that because it's ironic. My father always only wanted me to be happy. He loved me so much, but he thought happiness meant something different than I thought it meant. And his version of happiness was being a successful lawyer and making money and having, that credibility in life. And I understand why he thought that, but for me, happiness has turned out to be writing and being creative and not making so much money, but being extremely satisfied with the way my life has turned out. So I think if he were alive, he would see that really happiness meant two different things to the two of us.
I can agree with that. At times, parents need to admit, or adults need to admit when they also need, help as well. They fail to admit
Oh,
it. I
yeah.
remember once telling my mother that I think you need to go see a psychologist, and she refused. She refused, and this was like a serious topic, that we were discussing because I felt for myself that she hasn't let go of certain things that happened in her past, and that gets now filtered down to your children as well. I'm lucky that I managed to pick it up at a young age and be like, whoa, let me start fixing this myself. Now, when I look at my older siblings who I don't have a relationship with because they haven't been able to fix themselves, but it just filters down generation to generation because we haven't fixed, that mental illness. So parents also need to be open with themselves. Yes, I also need help. And why I love to focus on adults a lot on the show is because there's so much that we can do for them right now. If they choose to listen, cool, but there's a good high percentage of them that just don't want to listen because they're stubborn and they're stuck in their old ways. But I just want to help the generations to come, so it just starts with them. That's what I'm attempting to do. At the start we were talking about, well, not we, but smiling was mentioned.
Yes.
So I also believe there's so much power in smiling when you wake up, smiling before you sleep. Can you just touch on that a bit?
I think smiling actually activates certain neurons, is what I've read. There's something called a genuine smile is called a Duchenne smile, Duchenn, Duchenne, and it reaches your eyes. And that, I think, is such a lovely metaphor for what smiling actually does. It lets you see more clearly, I think.
And attracts positivity.
Yes. Yeah.
I also learned to meditation. There's two forms of meditation. It's different how they do it in countries such as India versus your Bali or Thailand. But in Bali, they believe in meditating with a smile, but not just a smile on your lips, but smiling from your heart, your liver, your organs upwards. The smile needs to come from within. So I also practice that as well. So when I meditate, my eyes are closed, my hands are in position, but I'm also got this big smile on my face because I'm trying to pull it all from within.
Well, I'm a big believer in mindfulness meditation, so I think I'll try that next time I do it. Thank you.
Yeah. I just practice all that I'm taught and see what works for me. But it does, just to wake up in the morning and just smile. Hey, I'm still here. Right, let's get the day going. I'm happy to be here. And then before I go to sleep, thank you, smiling again.
So smile.
Terry, I
Yeah.
have a question thinking about someone who might be listening right now who's struggling with their mental health. Having experienced so much in your life, right? And of course, there's more to come, right, in your life.
Yes.
What suggestion would you have, or insight from your own life? Here, somebody is struggling, right? Feeling it's never going to get better. In fact, it's never going to get better, and it's probably going to get worse, right? From your lived experience, what would you want that person to understand?
Well, I have something to say to that person, and I have something to say to the people who love that person. How to help, in other words, how to help yourself and how to help the person who's suffering. I think the best way I've found to help myself when I'm in depression and struggling is to remind myself, it's a little phrase, it's depression talking. When I can separate just slightly from the feelings and realize depression is this monster that wants the worst for me. And this is how depression thinks. It's negative. It's unable to come up with positive thoughts. And it's depression talking is a phrase that's gotten me through a lot. What I would say to the people who love someone who's struggling, this is something of a mission of mine. It's 5 little words. Sit down with the person who's struggling. Don't try to fix them. Don't try to cheer them up. Don't try to change them. Just say this to them. Tell me where it hurts. 5 little words. Tell me where it hurts. You would be amazed at what that can do when you're depressed, to be able to talk about it openly, as we've been discussing all through this interview, to limit to get rid of the secrecy, those negative thoughts, the blackness, just lightens just enough sometimes to get you through the day. It's an incredibly strong mantra. Tell me where it hurts.
So much love in that. Tell me where it hurts. I'm open to you. Tell me
Yeah.
where it hurts.
It's very hard to do sometimes because depressed people are really negative and are going to tell you why the world is a horrible place and why they should die and, you know, all these terrible things. But being able to express that pain has been a lifesaver for me. And I've seen it work for many, many other people.
How can we learn more about you? Your books, website. What would you recommend?
Well, my website's under construction right now, so I don't recommend that. But my books are all available on Amazon. Manic was the New York Times bestseller. That's about my life with bipolar disorder as an entertainment lawyer. The next one is The Dark Side of Innocence, Growing Up Bipolar. That's obviously about being a child with bipolar disorder. My third one was Modern Madness, an owner's manual, and that's really dedicated to all those who are struggling with someone who has bipolar disorder or mental illness in general. What can you do? What are relationships like? And it's mostly stories about bipolar disorder because I think those are much more interesting than clinical advice. And then I'm writing a fourth book, which hopefully will come out eventually, called Menace to Society. And we haven't really talked about this, but that's about what they call a dual diagnosis or co-occurring condition of bipolar disorder and substance use disorder, which is something I went through and survived. And I'm 28 years sober now. And it's a very common problem and not enough people are aware of it. But over 60% of people who are bipolar will also struggle with some form of substance use disorder. So that's my life in a nutshell, or my books.
Thank you so much, Terry, for shining your light. Really.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. Thank you, Kina. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you, Terry.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.